The sound of a sword clashing and a heavy thud echoed through the royal court. Silence fell, thick as the air before a storm. The king lay motionless, blood staining the cold floor beneath him. Amara stood tall, her grip on the sword firm. She did not flinch. Her eyes were cold, fixed on the lifeless body of the man who had once been her father. The weapon, still stained with blood, hung loosely in her hand. The royal guards, frozen in shock, did not know what to do. Their eyes darted from Amara to the king, then back again. The room trembled with confusion. Murmurs filled the air, whispers of disbelief. The nobles, their faces pale with shock, exchanged frantic glances. The people in the court could not believe their eyes. Did the princess really kill her father? They asked in hushed voices. The tension in the room rose like the heat of a fire, but none dared speak louder than the soft buzz of uncertain whispers. Amara remained still, her expression unreadable, her gaze never leaving her father's body. There was no sorrow, no regret, only cold determination. She had made her choice, and the world would now bear witness. The royal guards rushed in, their spears raised, their faces twisted with disbelief and anger. Their eyes locked onto Amara, but she did not move. She stood firm, her eyes steady on the body of the king, as if nothing else mattered. "Why, Amara?" A voice, trembling yet clear, broke through the heavy silence. "Why did you do it?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Every eye turned to Amara, waiting for a response. But the princess did not speak. She merely stood there, a silent figure of resolve, her breath steady despite the storm raging around her. From the back of the room, Zuri stepped forward, her heart beating fast but her voice strong. She did not hesitate, her words cutting through the silence like a blade. "It was not out of malice," she declared. "Amara did this to save you all. She did it to save the kingdom." The court fell into stunned silence. The whispers that had filled the room stopped. The nobles, the soldiers, the commoners, all stood still, their eyes wide in disbelief. What was this madness? Zuri continued, her voice unwavering. The king made a pact with dark forces. He sought power, too much power, and in doing so he cursed this land. He doomed us all. Amara acted to protect us. She had no choice. The air in the room thickened with shock, as though the very walls themselves were listening. No one had dared speak such truths before. It was a revelation no one had imagined. Amara remained silent, her gaze still fixed on her father's lifeless body. She had done what she had to do. The weight of it rested heavy on her shoulders, but her resolve did not falter. She had broken the curse. She had freed the kingdom. The people would have to find their own way now. The court remained hushed, each person caught in the gravity of what had just unfolded. What would become of them now? Would they understand? Would they accept the truth? In that moment, Amara's silence spoke louder than any words could. The fate of the kingdom lay in their hands now. They must decide, what would their future be in the wake of her choice? Amara stood by the palace window, her eyes distant, lost in thought. Her heart ached with the weight of her father's rule. She loved him, yet every day, the kingdom grew darker under his command. The people of Azaara were suffering. Villages enslaved, families torn apart, and fear in every corner. Amara felt it all, but she was trapped, unable to move. Her father's grip on the throne was ironclad, and her loyalty to him pulled at her soul like a heavy chain. But then there were the whispers, the cries of the people that seeped through the walls of the palace. They spoke of famine, of sickness, of despair. "It's a curse," they said. The crops were withering, the rivers ran dry, and strange clouds covered the skies. Something dark was happening, something tied to the king's thirst for power. She knew it, but she could not bring herself to face it. Not yet. In the quiet of the chamber, Zuri entered, her steps slow but steady. Amara turned to her, seeking comfort, but found only worry in her eyes. "Amara," Zuri said softly, "you cannot ignore it any longer. Your father. He is destroying everything. The people, the land. You." Amara's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to believe her father was just misguided, that he would change. But deep down, she knew the truth. The king was ruthless. His hunger for power was endless, and it fed on the suffering of the people. Zuri stepped closer, her voice filled with concern. You are the only one who can stop him. Please, Amara. You must act before it's too late. Amara turned away, her fingers curling around the edge of the stone wall. The weight of her father's actions pressed down on her chest. How could she betray him? The man who raised her, who gave her life. Yet, she could feel the people's pain, hear their cries in her dreams. That night, Elder Kofi came to her in secret, his face worn with age, but his eyes sharp with urgency. The king plans to perform a ritual, he whispered. A ritual that will destroy everything. The kingdom, your family, the land itself. Amara's heart raced. What kind of ritual? A dark one, Elder Kofi replied. A pact with forces older than the earth. A spirit of destruction has taken hold of him. To gain ultimate power, King Osei must sacrifice his own bloodline, his daughter. Amara staggered back, her hand pressed against her chest. He would sacrifice me. Elder Kofi nodded gravely. The ritual will be performed on the next full moon. If it succeeds, Azaara will fall, and your father will be consumed by the spirit. There is no going back after that. The words hit Amara like a storm. How had it come to this? Her father, the king she had always known, was lost to darkness. She was nothing more than a pawn in his ambition. But what could she do? How could she stop him without losing everything? Elder Kofi's voice was low and steady. You must act, Amara. If you do not, the kingdom will be destroyed. But if you stop the ritual, you will betray your father. The choice is yours. Amara's mind raced, her heart torn in two. The people of Azaara were suffering, dying under her father's rule, yet he was still her father. The weight of the kingdom's fate pressed upon her like a stone. She loved him, but she could not let this continue. Her breath trembled as she spoke, each word heavy with the impossible choice she faced. If I stop the ritual, I betray my father. But if I don't, the kingdom will be lost. What do I do, Elder? Elder Kofi's eyes softened with understanding. A leader's duty is to the people, Amara. Your father has chosen power over his kingdom. You must choose the kingdom. The silence that followed was suffocating. Amara's heart pounded in her chest. She stood on the edge of a precipice. If she stopped the ritual, she would sever the bond with her father forever. But if she allowed it to happen, the kingdom would be lost. The people's suffering would continue, and there would be no one left to save them. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her decision. Her duty was clear. She was the protector of Azaara, not just a daughter. She had to save her people. Amara took a deep breath, the resolve settling in her bones. I will stop him, she whispered. I will save the kingdom. And with that, the kingdom's fate rested in her hands. She would do what was needed, no matter the cost. The princess was no longer a child bound by love. She was a ruler, and the weight of the crown would guide her actions, even if it meant sacrificing everything she had ever known. Amara paced back and forth, her heart heavy with the burden of the choice before her. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Love for her father, fear for her people. She had grown up under his rule, believing in the strength of his leadership, but now the truth was clear. The power he sought had consumed him. A darkness had taken hold of his heart, and it threatened to destroy everything. Her people were suffering, the kingdom withering under his grip. Yet, could she stop him? Could she truly bring herself to betray her own blood? She clenched her fists, trying to silence the turmoil inside. Can I stop him without destroying everything? She whispered to herself, the question lingering in the air like a heavy fog. The door flew open, and Zuri rushed in, her face pale with worry. Amara, you cannot wait any longer. The king will doom us all unless you act. Her voice was sharp, her urgency unmistakable. Amara stopped, her eyes meeting Zuri's, but no words came. She understood the gravity of the situation, but the weight of her father's power pressed on her chest like a boulder. I know, Amara finally said, her voice trembling. But what if I fail? What if? Zuri shook her head fiercely. You will not fail. You must act for the kingdom, for the people. The king's heart is lost to darkness. Only you can stop this. Amara's breath caught. She knew Zuri was right, but it didn't make the decision any easier. The pain of what she might have to do was almost unbearable. Later that night, they met in secret with Elder Kofi, the wise man who had once served her father. His face was drawn, his eyes shadowed with worry. He spoke in a low voice, his words weighted with the gravity of the moment. "The curse can only be stopped by the spilling of the king's blood," he said. "You must decide if you are willing to make the ultimate sacrifice." The words landed like stones in Amara's heart. She could barely breathe as they settled in her mind. The king's blood, her father's blood, was the only way to break the curse. But what did that mean for her? Could she truly take the life of the man who had given her everything? Her eyes fell to the floor, her thoughts clouded. How can I do this?" she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Elder Kofi's gaze was firm, but there was a sadness in his eyes. "A leader's duty is to protect the kingdom, no matter the cost. If you do nothing, the land will die, and so will your people. If you act, you will save them, but at a great price. The choice is yours." The weight of those words pressed on Amara's soul. The choice was clear, yet the road to it was filled with thorns. Her heart wavered, torn between love and duty. The days passed, and as the full moon drew closer, the tension in the kingdom grew. The royal guards began watching her more closely, their eyes filled with suspicion. One whispered to another, his voice low, "What is she planning?" Amara felt their eyes on her like burning coals. She could feel the tightening noose of their doubt. What would they do if they discovered what she was considering? Would they turn against her, as the king would? Would they see her as a traitor, or a savior? The moon rose higher each night, its pale light casting an eerie glow over the kingdom. Amara's heart raced as the time drew nearer. She knew that her father's ritual would soon be upon them. If she didn't act, it would be too late. Amara walked into the royal court one fateful evening, her body trembling with dread. The king sat before her, his gaze hard, his face cold. "Father," she said, her voice shaking, "the kingdom is dying. You are leading us to ruin." The king's eyes glinted with an icy rage. He stood, his voice cold as steel. "You don't understand, Amara. I do what is necessary for power. It is for the good of the kingdom, for the strength of Azaara. I will not stop." He moved closer, his presence overwhelming. "If you stand against me, I will destroy you. You are my blood, but you've become weak, just like the rest of them." His words stung, and the betrayal she felt twisted her insides. He was no longer the father she had known, no longer the man she had respected. He was a stranger, consumed by power and greed. The king she had loved was lost, and in his place stood a monster. Amara stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. Her hands clenched at her sides. The full moon was nearing, and every moment that passed was another step closer to the kingdom's destruction. "I must act before it's too late," she whispered to Zuri as they met in private once more. Her resolve began to harden, like stone being forged in fire. She knew what she had to do. "I will stop him," Amara said, her voice quiet but firm. "Even if it means betraying everything I've known." The choice had been made. But as the people of Azaara heard rumors of her actions, the kingdom began to divide. Some saw her as a traitor, others as the only hope for salvation. The streets were filled with whispers, some speaking in fear, others in hope. Amara's heart ached, but there was no turning back now. The king, oblivious to the growing rebellion, continued with his dark preparations. The ritual was nearly complete. His eyes burned with an insatiable hunger for power as the night of the full moon drew near. The final test loomed before Amara. Her father's fate was sealed, but so was hers. With the night of the full moon rising higher, Amara took one last look at the father she had once loved, knowing this moment would change everything. The kingdom's survival depended on thee. As the full moon rose high in the sky, its light was cold and unforgiving, casting a harsh glow over the kingdom. Amara slipped silently into the royal chamber. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw her father standing before the altar, his back to her, his hands raised high. He was ready to summon the spirit of destruction, the evil force that had corrupted him. Her heart hammered in her chest, but her resolve was firm. The time had come. "Father," she called out, her voice steady, though her heart raced. King Osei turned, his face twisted in fury. His eyes were cold, like dark stones, burning with hatred. "You dare come here, Amara," he snarled. "You've betrayed your bloodline." Amara stood tall, despite the fear clawing at her insides. "I came to stop you, father. This curse must end." The king's anger flared. "You know nothing of power, nothing of what I've sacrificed," he shouted, shaking his fists at her. "You were always weak." Amara's voice was unshaken. "The curse is real, and you are bringing doom to us all." The air around them grew thick, heavier than before. A coldness spread through the room, and from the altar, a dark energy began to stir. The spirit was awakening. Amara could feel it in her bones. She stepped forward, her heart pounding, knowing time was running out. The king's eyes gleamed with madness, but there was something else there too. A hint of the man he once was, before power had corrupted him. For just a moment, Amara saw him clearly, the father who had raised her, the protector of their people. But that was gone now. There was no turning back. The spirit's energy twisted and crackled, its power beginning to tear at the very walls of the chamber. Amara's hands shook, but she forced herself to focus. This was it. She had to act. With a deep breath, she looked at her father one last time, her gaze filled with both love and sorrow. "This ends now," she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. Without hesitation, she raised the sword that had been at her side. The weight of it seemed unbearable, but her hands were steady. She closed her eyes for just a moment, gathering every ounce of strength she had. Then, with a single powerful motion, she plunged the sword deep into her father's heart. The king gasped, his eyes widening in shock. "No, Amara," he whispered, his voice weak as the life drained from him. "You've condemned yourself." The words hit her like a strike to the chest, but there was no turning back. The sword had already done its work. King Osei, the ruler of Azaara, breathed his last. The darkness that had consumed him was gone, but in its place was a profound silence. As the king's body slumped to the ground, the air around them crackled with fury. The spirit, its power tethered to the king's life, howled in rage. Its dark energy surged from the altar, a violent force that threatened to tear the room apart. Amara stepped back, her heart pounding. She could feel the malevolent power swirling around her, but she stood firm. She had made her choice. The spirit would not claim her. The curse had lived as long as the king's heart had beat. Now that the king was gone, the dark force began to fade. Slowly, the room began to quiet. The oppressive weight of fear and darkness that had hung in the air lifted, like smoke dispersing in the wind. The curse, at last, was broken. The first light of the new day began to filter through the chamber, casting soft rays across the cold stone floor. Amara stood, her chest heaving, her mind reeling from the choice she had made. She had saved her people, but at what cost? The price of her father's life was one she would carry forever. But for the first time in years, there was hope. The kingdom could heal. The evil spirit was gone. But as she stood over her father's body, something inside her shifted. She felt the darkness still, lingering deep within her, like a shadow that refused to leave. The curse had been broken, but its mark remained. She could feel it now, its presence a constant weight on her soul. She knew, as surely as the sun would rise, that the battle was far from over. She turned away from her father's body, the weight of her decision heavy on her shoulders. The kingdom was free, but the journey ahead would not be easy. She had freed them, but she now carried the curse in her heart. It would follow her, haunt her steps, a reminder of the man she had loved and had to destroy. As Amara stepped out of the royal chamber, the first rays of dawn broke through the windows, spreading a warm, golden light over the kingdom. A new day had come, and with it, a new chapter for Azaara. The people were free. They could rebuild, and with Amara's leadership, they would rise from the ashes of the darkness that had consumed them. Though the curse would never truly leave her, Amara knew she had made the right choice. She had saved her people, and now, she would lead them into a brighter future. No matter the challenges that lay ahead, she was ready. The weight of her father's curse would not break her. Instead, it would make her stronger. The people of Azaara poured into the streets, their voices lifting in a song of triumph. Drums beat in rhythm with the pulse of their hearts, and feet danced on the earth, stamping the ground with joy. Crops once withered under the weight of the king's curse now sprouted strong and green. The land, which had known only darkness, was alive again. A sense of hope, long buried, began to bloom like the flowers of spring. The kingdom was free, the sky clear for the first time in years. But amid the celebrations, one soul stood apart. On the balcony of the royal palace, Amara gazed down at the people, her eyes distant. Her heart, though heavy with the knowledge that she had freed the kingdom, remained restless. The throne her father had once sat upon now seemed like a weight she could not bear. The joy around her felt far away, a distant echo that did not reach her ears. A group of villagers gathered below, their faces full of gratitude, their voices calling her name in praise. "You saved us, princess. You freed us," they chanted, lifting their arms in worship. Amara nodded, but her thoughts were far from the crowd. She saw their joy, but it did not touch her heart. She had given them freedom, but the cost had been far greater than she could bear. Her father's blood was on her hands, and the memory of his final curse, his bitter words, echoed in her mind like the howl of a windstorm. She had broken the curse, but its shadow still clung to her. Later, in the quiet of her chambers, Amara stood before the mirror, her face pale and tired. The reflection staring back at her seemed like a stranger. "I saved my people, but at what cost?" she whispered, the question hanging in the air unanswered. The weight of the curse lingered in her heart. She had freed Azaara, but she had lost the one person who had meant everything to her. The battle was not over. The spirit may have been vanquished, but the darkness inside her remained. Zuri, always by her side, entered the room quietly, sitting beside her. "You did what you had to do, Amara," she said gently. "Your people are free because of you." Amara shook her head, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I still lost him, Zuri. I lost my father." Zuri placed a hand on her shoulder. "The road to freedom is never easy. You fought for the kingdom, Amara. You gave them hope." But Amara's heart still ached. The shadow of her father's death followed her, as if his curse had passed to her, marking her with an unseen scar. That evening, Elder Kofi arrived at the palace. His steps were slow but steady, his eyes wise with the weight of years and knowledge. He took Amara's hands in his, the touch grounding her. "The path of a ruler is never easy," he said softly. "True power comes not from blood or force, but from justice and love for your people." Amara listened, but her heart was still heavy. The kingdom was free, yes, but her journey felt far from over. The memory of her father's madness, his betrayal of all that he had once been, haunted her. Standing before her people in the royal courtyard the next day, Amara's voice rang out, strong and unwavering. "I will lead with wisdom and fairness," she declared, her eyes scanning the crowd. "No more fear, no more cruelty. This kingdom will be built on justice for all." The people cheered, their voices lifting in support. Yet, Amara's heart remained unchanged. She had spoken the words, but the journey ahead would not be easy. The scars of the past ran deep, and she would need more than just words to heal them. As she walked through the streets of Azaara, the people cheered. Their faces, once clouded with fear, now shone with hope. But Amara saw the deep lines of suffering etched into their skin. The kingdom was healing, but the scars of the past remained. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. She would rebuild from the ground up, piece by piece. Zuri and Elder Kofi walked by her side, their presence a steady reminder of the support she would need. "You are not alone in this," Zuri whispered to her. "Together, we will guide the kingdom." Amara nodded, her resolve hardening like stone. She could feel the weight of her father's legacy behind her, but she knew she could not allow it to define the future of Azaara. The strength of her leadership would come from the love she showed her people, not the fear that once ruled them. The sun began to set, casting its golden light over the kingdom. The first light of a new day had broken. Amara stood on the hill overlooking the city, her heart still burdened with the weight of the past. But she knew that the future of Azaara was in her hands. The kingdom was reborn. Though the loss of her father would remain in her heart, she had gained something far more powerful, a heart of a ruler, strong and steady. The journey was just beginning. Amara stood before the people of Azaara, her heart heavy but steadfast. The cheers of the crowd echoed around her, but she did not join in their joy. The kingdom had been freed, but But she understood that true leadership is not won in a moment of triumph. It is shaped by the weight of sacrifice, of decisions that burn deep within the soul. She raised her hand to quiet the crowd, and as the noise slowly faded, her voice rang out, clear and strong. "Sometimes we must do what is right, even when it hurts," she began, her eyes sweeping across the faces of her people. Some were filled with gratitude, their eyes bright with hope, while others bore the scars of years under a king who ruled with fear. The hardest choices shape us into who we are meant to be. And in that moment of choice, we find our true strength. Amara paused, feeling the depth of her words settle in the air. She could see the struggle in their eyes. The battle for freedom had not come without loss, but she had chosen the path that would lead them all to a new dawn. A true leader, she knew, does not seek power for herself, but for the well-being of the people. A true leader does not seek power for themselves, she continued, her voice unwavering. It is not the crown that makes a ruler, but the love and justice they bring to the people they lead. It is through sacrifice, through choosing what is right, that we build the foundation of a kingdom that will stand for generations. Her mind drifted, the memories of the past flooding her thoughts. Her father's cruel reign, the weight of his madness, and the agonizing decision to end his life. She had killed the man who gave her life, and with that, she had broken the curse that bound her kingdom to darkness. She had lost much, but in the cost of her sacrifice, she had gained the strength to carry the burden of leadership. "I lost much," she said, her voice softer now, as the memories rose to the surface. "But I gained the strength to do what was necessary. And I stand before you now, ready to lead not with fear, but with justice in my heart." The crowd stood silent, their faces a reflection of the weight of her words. They knew the kingdom had not been reshaped merely by the fall of a tyrant. It had been reshaped by the courage of one who had chosen to lead with wisdom, even when the cost seemed too great to bear. "The future of Azaara," Amara declared, her gaze sweeping over the people, her resolve growing, "is not in the hands of one ruler, but in the hearts of all its people. Together, we will rebuild this kingdom with justice and compassion. The road ahead will not be easy, but we will walk it together. We are Azaara, and together, we will thrive." With those words, Amara turned and walked away from the crowd. Zuri and Elder Kofi were there, waiting for her, offering their support. Zuri placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did well, Amara," she said softly, but Amara's expression remained stoic, her heart still burdened with the weight of the future. "The work is just beginning," she replied, her voice steady, though a storm brewed inside her. Alone later, Amara sat in quiet reflection. The faces of her people, their hopes, and their fears, swirled in her mind. She had made the choice to kill her father, and though it had saved the kingdom, the cost had been high. The memory of that moment still haunted her, but she knew that it had been the only way. "This is the price of leadership," she whispered to herself, her voice barely a breath. "And I will bear it for Azaara." The kingdom moved forward, slowly but surely. The streets, once silent with fear, were now filled with life and laughter. The people of Azaara were united under a ruler who had learned the true meaning of justice. No longer would the kingdom be ruled by fear, but by love and fairness. Amara's legacy, though shaped by great loss, would be one of compassion, strength, and the courage to do what was right. As the sun set over Azaara, Amara stood at the palace gates, watching the kingdom pulse with life. There was hope now, a new beginning. Though the road ahead would be hard, she was ready. "Together, we will thrive," she murmured to herself, her voice resolute. And with that, she took her place as a ruler, not just for the people but with them. The future of Azaara was in their hands, and with every step, they would build a kingdom of justice and peace.